Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the Age Forward Coalition event. My name is Sandy Winter, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to hear about how we can promote successful aging using two very useful frameworks. We are going to have with us Marie Connolly-Smith, who is a social science research professional from Stanford Center on Longevity, and Sarah Steenhausen, who is the Deputy Director for the California Department of Aging, in the Division of Aging Policy Research and Equity. And as I mentioned, my name is Sandy Winter, and I'm the Executive Director at Senior Co-Siders, and I'm part of the leadership team of the Age Forward Coalition. So just some housekeeping as we let people trickle in. All attendees will be muted during the presentation. This is a webinar. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear them. If you can put them in the Q&A section as we go along, and we're going to spend some time at the end for answering questions. And we will also be checking if you would like to send them to info@ageforwardsmc.org. So two ways to submit your questions, in the Q&A section or by email. And we do have closed captioning available. So if you would like to use that, you can select the CC icon on your toolbar, and that will enable the subtitles. And then also subsequent to this presentation, we will be sending a copy of the recording and the slides will be made available for anybody who would like to learn more about it. So just to tell you a little bit more about the Age Forward Coalition, first of all, we are a group of nonprofit providers, community advocates, and various people who are interested in committing to advocating for increased funding, because we know that this is so important to maintain, protect, promote, and enhance services and supports for older adults in San Mateo County and for adults with disabilities and for their caregivers. And the reason why we're focused on this is because we want to ensure the highest possible attainment of independence, health, and well-being, and to make San Mateo County a more aging and disability-friendly community. So I mentioned that we're part of the Age Forward Coalition. Along with myself, there's Susan Houston, who's works at Peninsula Family Services, Tom Barrett, who is a community volunteer, Anne Cooney, who is also a community volunteer, and Patty Clement, who's with Catholic Charities. So now I'm going to hand over to Maria Kalina, who is the Executive Director for the California Collaborative for Long-Term Services and Supports.
The California Collaborative is absolutely delighted to support today's discussion, which is one of many master plan for aging and disability-friendly conversations that will take place across California over the next 2 years. The Collaborative's 21 regional members, on the next slide, which include the Age Forward Coalition of San Mateo, span 45 of California's 58 counties and include more than 1,000 organizations. And collectively, the network represents roughly 95% of the state's older and disabled adults. And the regional network and its statewide counterpart, on the next slide, work to advance an LTSS system of care rooted in the principles of dignity, health, and independence. Our statewide membership includes 35 organizations ranging from AARP and United Domestic Workers, Justice and Aging, and so many others. And the collaborative together works to foster understanding about the importance of LTSS. We educate policymakers about the needs of older and disabled adults, and develop policy solutions and recommendations for improvements. And lastly, we support members in their advocacy efforts. And so really just here to connect this to a much broader effort across the state. And with that, I will pass it back to Sandy.
Thank you, Maria. So I know that the Age Forward Coalition just partnered with CCLTSS to do Senior Advocacy Day, when we got to speak to various different policymakers, and that was wonderful. So we've certainly benefited from the work that the collaborative does. So on the next slide, I'm now have the greatest of pleasure to introduce Marie Conley-Smith. She is a social science research professional, and she's going to be talking to us about the new map of life. And Marie is at the Stanford Center on Longevity. And I'm so enamored with this new map of life. I just think it's a wonderful way for us to start thinking about how we can envision our futures differently. So Marie, thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about this work, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you and from Sarah later as well. So as Sandy said, my name is Marie Conley-Smith. I'm a research associate at the Stanford Center on Longevity. My background is in psychology. I have a master's in social and personality psychology. And at the center, I wear a number of different hats. The primary ones are that I coordinate our annual Student Longevity Design Challenge, and I work on our new Map of Life project, which is what I'll be sharing with you today. So first, for a little background, the Stanford Center on Longevity was founded 15 years ago as a multidisciplinary research center by Professor Laura Carstensen, who studies aging. The mission of the center is to enhance the quality of long lives so that they're healthy and rewarding for people of all ages. And an important distinction is that we are a center on longevity, not a center on old age, because we believe that building a world where the majority of people thrive in old age requires attention to the entire lifespan. So today I'll be speaking about the Center on Longevity's New Map of Life initiative, which addresses how our society in the US is doing in terms of supporting longer lives and how we can do better. So I'll start with an introduction about why we study longer lives and why it's important. And then I'll tell you about how this leads to our New Map of Life project, what it is, and then I'll share some of our findings thus far. So starting with why we study longer lives. On the next slide, we'll see a graph that I'll start with because it's quite representative of why we exist as a research center. The longevity story, as it says, is about dramatically increasing life expectancies over the last century. And this graph shows how life expectancy at birth has changed in the US. You can see on the vertical axis, the y-axis, we have life expectancy in years going from age 30 to age 90, which we haven't quite reached as an average yet, but just so you can see the whole span. And on the x-axis, we have historical dates starting in 1860 over on the left and going to 2020. That's the latest year we have data for this particular graph. And before this graph even starts, up until the early 1800s, life expectancy hovered around 30 years old for much of modern human history. And since then, over the last century and a half that's shown here, life expectancy has steadily risen. You know, aside from a couple of dips that you can see in the 1860s, that's around the time of the Civil War in the US, and then that other dip around 1918, the Great Influenza. I expect we'll see another one, you know, after 2020. But after those earlier trends, the life expectancy increase picks right back up. And in the last century and a half that's represented here, life expectancy has essentially doubled. You can see it goes from an average of 47 in 1900 to today, an average of 79 in the US. And if you think about this increase historically, this is in the blink of an eye. And what's happened is that our culture has not had a chance to catch up. And the milestones that we live our life by, like when we go to school and when we retire, have essentially remained unchanged. And now we have a mismatch, essentially, between our cultural expectations of aging and the reality of aging. And there's more going on than just people living to advanced ages. At the same time, as average lifespan has been increasing, birth rates have been dropping. And we can see this trend on the next slide. Both of these phenomena together are shifting the makeup of our society. So this graph shows the age distribution of the US population, and we'll walk through the whole thing, in 1900 and now, 2020. On the x-axis, we have age, again, going from age 0 to age 74 on the right. And then the y-axis, the vertical axis, is the percentage of the population. So it's, you know, what percent of the population is at each of these ages. And what we want to pay attention to is sort of the overall pattern of each of these colors, each of these years, and how the shape of each changes. So first we'll focus on just the blue lines, just the US population in the year 1900. You'll see that the overall blue shape is essentially a triangle. On the left-hand side, a large percent of the population is young, and it dwindles until a very small percent of the population is old. So essentially in 1900, there were a lot of children and relatively few old people. And if we shift our attention to just the orange lines, which is the population in 2020, you'll see that the overall shape of it is much more flat. It's almost like a rectangle, just with like kind of a squiggly top. So what this is indicating is that there are essentially equal numbers of people at every age until about age 70, and only then does it begin to taper. So in 1900, the blue lines, there were more people being born, but death was more common at every age. So you get this sort of population taper. And now in the orange, we have fewer people being born, but basically everyone is just more likely to live for, an entire human lifespan, at least with the life expectancy that we have now. So because we are now more likely to have people of every age alive at the same time, this means that our families and our workplaces and our social networks are much more intergenerational than ever before. So we've essentially doubled our life expectancy and given the majority of our people the opportunity to live to old age. And I think this can be viewed as one of the greatest accomplishments in human history. But our societal response has been one of fear. And that's what's depicted here. This is an illustration done in 2014 for The Economist that sort of gets at this societal fear that what this aging society means is that we're going to essentially have a huge number of dependent old people overwhelming our support systems. And, individually, people worry about paying for long retirements and caring for their parents and loved ones. I personally, think all the time about my 62-year-old mom is the primary caregiver for my 82-year-old grandmother. And these are all valid concerns. And, this sort of grim outcome is certainly possible, but it's not at all inevitable. And I think we can argue, and I will argue, that we're actually staring at a pretty extraordinary opportunity if we actually look at the data and identify the trends that are coming at us and prepare for them appropriately. So I'm going to switch over to some positive data. This graph here is sort of a tongue-in-cheek representation of how we societally typically think about aging. So on the x-axis, we have age again, going from 20 to 90, so all of adulthood. And the y-axis says any variable you like. So you can basically insert any variable you can think of. And this illustrates how we think about aging. And it essentially assumes that everything gets worse as you age. But this isn't actually what the science says. Here's the reality. The science does not support the aging stereotypes. Good health and functional independence last much longer than most people think, continuing well into the 70s and even 80s for many people. And a majority of people continue to be healthy enough to work into their 70s. And one finding that I've really taken to heart since engaging with this work is that mental health has actually been shown to improve with age, including stress and worry and anger. And actually the worst mental health has been found among young people. So there's a lot of intergenerational opportunity there. And in terms of working and learning, we find that cognitive processing speed does decrease with age slightly, but the experience and wisdom that come with older age often make up for it. And relatedly, we are increasingly finding that what we had assumed was normal cognitive decline, particularly with memory, is actually an increase in the number of people experiencing some form of dementia. And in healthy people, there's actually very little decline. So we have this aging population with more people from every generation alive at one time than ever before. And with this shift comes great opportunity, but we're not really taking advantage of it. So this led us at the Center on Longevity to ask the question, if we assume that most people in society are going to live to be 100 years old, what do we need to do as individuals and as a society to make this a positive change? So the new map of life is the Center on Longevity's response to that question. Roughly 3 years ago, in 2018, we convened a group of experts at Stanford who came from widely diverse areas. We had psychologists, physicians, climate scientists, engineers, and others from academia, industry, and government. We spent 2 days in a workshop where we identified 9 different research domains that you can see here on the left-hand side of the slide that we felt had the best opportunity for positive change. So then we went out and found some sponsors, and with their backing, we hired 9 postdoctoral research fellows, 1 in each of these 9 domains that you see here. And each of these research fellows worked with a Stanford faculty advisor and spent 2 years, it was 2019 to 2021, researching what is known about their domain relative to long life outcomes. So each of these fellows produced a detailed report on their findings at the end of the 2 years. And then we worked with a professional writer who condensed these findings into a single document. You can see the cover of it on the right-hand side of the slide. That's what all the road signs are for. And that report highlights the major trends that need to be addressed and leveraged. So I'll spend the rest of this talk briefly summarizing 8 of the main findings from that report. And these findings can be thought of essentially as principles that can guide us as we begin to lay the groundwork for a more longevity-ready society. So I encourage those of you who are interested to download the report from our website, which is listed here, newmapoflife.stanford.edu. We also have the fellows' detailed reports on the website, as well as a longer, more in-depth version of the report. So plenty of reading material. And if you're more of a listener rather than a reader, we do also have a podcast, the Century Lives podcast, which is a very enjoyable listen. It's hosted by Ken Stern, formerly of NPR. And actually, I'm going to plug the podcast one more time in my talk, so look out for that. So onto the findings. First, as will be no surprise from what I've shared thus far, age diversity is here, and it's also a positive for our society. You know, as we saw in my previous slides, we are living in one of the most age diverse societies in human history, with more generations alive at the same time than ever before. And this is a good thing. You know, younger and older people bring different qualities to the table. Young people are often enthusiastic about discovery and are faster, and older people often have emotional wisdom and experience. So combining those attributes creates new possibilities for communities and neighborhoods, for workplaces, and for families who are more likely to have grandparents and even great-grandparents alive to spend time with grandchildren. And we're finding that actually multiple generations of families are more likely to live together. A survey from the nonprofit organization Generations United very recently found that about 1/4 of Americans are living in a household with 3 or more generations. And that is not as much as in some other countries, but it's 4 times more in America than it was 10 years ago. So it's on the rise, and a lot of it recently is due to the pandemic and the financial difficulties that many families face during this time. But I found this surprising, in a good surprising, that 72% of those survey respondents said that they plan to keep their arrangements to live in multi-generational households in the long term. They said that in addition to helping with the finances, it also helped with their family bond, and it helped them meet their caregiving needs in their families of both the old and the young. And relatedly, investing in children, see on the next slide, investing in children or future centenarians delivers big returns. Our research fellow in the area of early childhood, Dr. Jonas Miller, likes to say that childhood is an area of high opportunity and of high risk. You know, it's a time to set children on a healthy path, but it's also a time when deficits in things like nutrition, education, social support can begin and accumulate over time. So one of our most significant findings for the new map of life, especially sort of in the context of aging, is that in order to build a society that better supports 100-year lives, is that we need to start very young, because a lot of what happens in childhood can have ripple effects across the lifespan. And as a positive example of this, there's a Nobel Prize winning economist at the University of Chicago, Dr. James Heckman, who studied the effect that high quality childhood programs can have on children who are beginning at a disadvantage. And he found that the biggest effect was for the youngest children. And for children aged 0 to 5, so very young, these programs delivered a return on investment of 13% each year over the lifetime for the child. And this is even greater than programs that started later into childhood. And those later childhood programs are still beneficial. The point is just that the earliest investments in children pay the largest dividends. And these types of programs benefit the parents as well, who are more able and likely to pursue learning and career opportunities while their children are being cared for. So align health spans to lifespans. So first, we'll define health span. Health span is the number of years in which people are healthy, physically mobile, and free of pain. And one of our findings is that we need to switch how we measure success away from just measuring life expectancy, the number of years lived, which paints an incomplete picture about how we're really doing, and instead focus on the alignment of health span with lifespan. And what this means is extending the number of years that we spend in good health to all ages. And there are opportunities to do this at every age, nutrition in childhood, mental health in young adulthood, or sleep and exercise in midlife when work and family pressures coincide. This is not a novel thought. The idea of health span has been around for a little while, but it hasn't necessarily gained major traction, in large part because it's difficult to figure out how to measure, especially compared to something as sort of simple as life expectancy. And it's something that we aim to keep addressing as we continue with our new map of life research. We do know that public health is a large part of promoting longer health spans, especially if we are to address health disparities in disadvantaged communities, as well as new healthcare options like telemedicine, which greatly increases access to doctors. And it also makes universal high-speed internet an imperative going forward. And another important component for increasing health spans, along with many other life outcomes, is education. Now, our education system is poised for major change, including and beyond what we've seen during the pandemic. With longer lifespans, it's becoming increasingly important for us to move away from treating education as something that concludes in early adulthood. Lifelong learning is going to become much more important and even become the norm as people need to acquire new skills over the course of 40 and even 50-year careers. We know that education is one of the best predictors of life outcomes, and yet our education fellow actually does not recommend college for all as a solution. So I'm actually going to let her explain in a short video.
My name is Alana Horowitz, and I'm a professor at Tulane University, and I was previously the Education Postdoctoral Fellow at the Stanford Center on Longevity. I'm here today to share findings from research that I've been conducting with my colleague, Mitchell Stevens, also a professor of education at Stanford University, about the role of education in the new map of life. So it may surprise many people to learn that only 40% of Americans have a 4-year college degree. This means that most Americans never start college or don't finish. But the longer Americans attend school, the better and longer they will live. Going to college and finishing colleges often adds several more years of life. But here's the problem. Most people who don't complete college are people of color or people who come from poor or working class families. It means we live in a society in which white and affluent people tend to live longer and healthier lives. Over the last several decades, the college degree has come to divide Americans in so many ways. How did we get here? So the decades following World War II were a time of great post-secondary expansion, partly because of things like the GI Bill. College succeeded in creating great opportunities for about 40% of the population who have come to be able to get a college degree and to reach the middle class and sometimes beyond. This leads many of us now to think that maybe the best way forward is to just get more people into these typical four-year colleges. But Mitchell and I think that this strategy might actually exacerbate inequalities. Our research suggests that the four-year traditional version of college as we've known it has reached its limit. So how do we reimagine a new model of education that can generate opportunity for the 60% of Americans whose needs will likely never be met by a brick and mortar 4 to 6 year institution that we are expected to go to when we are 18 to 22 years old? That model of education, which worked so well in the 20th century, doesn't work in the 21st century because our lives are not as linear. And so we need to reimagine an education that happens across the life course. There is no one silver bullet, and our full report outlines a myriad of recommendations for policymakers, for colleges and universities, for employers, for learning service providers, and for philanthropists. My name.
Yeah, so I cut it off for time, but as Alana mentioned, there's much more detail in the report, but a couple of the recommendations include moving away from using the college degree as a benchmark for qualification for many jobs, and putting more emphasis on options like apprenticeships and employer-based training and online learning. And universities and community colleges will certainly continue to play important roles going forward, but they could be doing more to develop programs for non-traditional learners, which includes people over the age of 25 and actually already makes up about 60% of undergraduates. So if we aim to live 100-year lives that are physically, mentally, and financially healthy, as well as full of purpose and meaning, then a key component for most people is going to be working more years. But we won't work as we have been doing, where we cram consistent full-time work into sort of this one chunk of life. It's going to need to include more on and off ramps and flexibility to allow for all components of life, including caregiving of the young and old, pursuing learning opportunities, as we discussed, and ideally also some fun and rest and relaxation as well along the way. Now, work has experienced great disruption during the pandemic, as I'm sure we're all aware. You know, many are calling this period the Great Resignation and the Great Retirement, given the number of people who have been leaving the workforce, which is not good news for longer lives. Although some studies are showing that the people who are leaving their jobs are also returning to new or different jobs. But I think either way, this trend points to the fact that workers of all ages are already looking for more options in the way that they work, whether it's remote work, part-time, or dipping in and out of the workforce. And this is actually the topic of discussion in the Century Lives podcast. I said I'd plug it one more time. So I encourage you to check that out. This whole season is about work and the current trends in work. But overall, we believe that the trend is going toward working more years, but perhaps less hours per day or per week, or taking more gaps along the way. So the impact of our environments really cannot be overstated. Our environments impact every age group across many domains, including physical and mental health on both the individual and the community level. You know, examples include making sure that there are safe and flexible housing options for people of all income levels, or providing nearby walkable routes and access to green space, both of which have been shown to promote physical activity, or creating spaces that encourage multiple generations to feel connected to one another. Our environmental fellows, we had 2 environmental fellows, one who focused on climate and one who focused on the built environment. They recently worked with their advisors in those spaces and published an article in Nature Aging, where they broadened the idea of building age-friendly communities, which take specifically into account the physical and cognitive changes that happen in old age. And they expanded that to building for longevity-ready environments, which more actively address the health needs at all ages so that people spend more time in good health, increase health span, and arrive at old age in a much better place. So just as medical and technology advances have helped us reach this stage of longevity, continued advances in medicine and technology will help make the future experience of aging quite different than how it is for older adults today. And we're starting to see examples of what this might look like. The photo shown here on this slide is of a suit that electrically stimulates muscles to help offset sarcopenia, which is muscle loss with aging. Another great example of something that I already take for granted, and most people here probably do as well, are smartphones, which, if you think about it, expand our cognitive and our memory capacity well beyond what any of us could have imagined, 20 or 30 years ago within our own lifetimes. I think this is a great example of how technology is already so integrated into our lives, and with continued advances in things like, the suit, for example, or smart skin health monitors and robotics, we can continue to integrate it in constructive ways. The other potentially game-changing aspect of this is the emergence of a field called geroscience, which is a biological effort to identify the causes of aging at the cellular level and then slow or even reverse them. This is sometimes equated with life extension, but at least at first, it's going to be much more about living well longer and delaying aging at the cellular level. This is a pretty new field, so it's still pretty high risk, but there's a lot of investment being made and advancements, scientific advancements are being made in it every day as well. So finally, we need to recognize that longer lives come with many transitions along the way. And one of the key changes that we need to make, both individually and collectively, is to realize that rather than just bringing uncertainty, these life transitions bring with them new opportunities. Instead of viewing older adulthood as just a transition of decline, we can create new milestones around things like volunteering and mentoring, or launching an encore career, or changing one's living situation to better suit new needs. For adults of all ages, we can expect to see moving in and out of careers and learning opportunities and taking on new family and community roles across the life course. And we see these changes as a feature, not as a bug. Thank you. The last slide just has our website and our contact information in, but I can put that in the chat.
Well, thank you, Marie. I just found that so fascinating. I've read the report and it's lovely to actually hear a presentation about it as well. What great work. So we're going to move from the new map of life to talk a little bit more about the California Master Plan for Aging. And the expert that we have today with us is Sarah Steenhuisen, who is the Deputy Director of the California Department of Aging in the Division of Aging Policy Research and Equity. So thank you, Sarah, so much for joining us today to tell us more about the Master Plan for Aging.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sandy. And boy, Marie, I absolutely love your presentation. So much about it resonates, I think, with the Master Plan for Aging that I'll be talking about, building off some of the themes you were talking about. But just a little bit about myself. As Sandy said, my name's Sarah Steenhuisen. I just recently started at the Department of Aging about 4 months ago. We are launching a new division of policy research and equity. It's a really exciting opportunity for us here to build our team and our capacity to advance the policy issues and initiatives within the Master Plan for Aging that really fall across departments. This is not just about the services that we operate here at the Department of Aging, but also about working with our sister departments and agencies in realizing the goals of the master plan that I'll talk about right now. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk a bit about what the master plan is at very high level and where we are now and where some opportunities are for you and where you can engage. Next slide. So I don't need to repeat this. I think Marie did a wonderful job talking about the increased life expectancy. And as we know, Californians are living longer. And next slide, please. We also know that our aging population is becoming increasingly diverse. So as Marie noted, it's really important for us to think about, as people age, how can we ensure that they age healthy? And so they live long lives of quality and engagement and with the services and supports they need in the community. It's particularly important for us to think about this in the sense of diversity and cultural competency, because as we know, with the increasing diversity of our aging population, it has a lot of implications for how services are delivered and ensuring that the workforce and the services are culturally competent with the access needed across languages and communities across the state. And I wanted to just kind of add on to this issue that Marie was talking about in terms of looking at aging as a net positive. Age diversity is a net positive. I think all too often it's easy to fall into the practice of talking about our aging population as if it's a net burden on society. But really, it's our responsibility to see it as, really an incredible opportunity. I think that we have much more to learn from our older adults. We're very proud of the fabric of our society and having older adults and really weaving them into our system rather than seeing aging as a time when we need to separate and have people become forgotten as they age. So I think it's really part of this bigger paradigm shift in our state and in our society in general that's needed to reframe how we look at aging. Next slide, please. So in 2019, Governor Newsom issued an executive order calling for the establishment of a master plan for aging to really look at the needs of our society at a whole system level. Because as we all know, the population is aging, and as we discussed, it has significant implications across the service delivery system. So how can we prepare California for the aging of our population and change the paradigm of aging so that we embrace the gift of aging across all sectors? So with the executive order, it launched an extensive planning process at the state level that engaged a number of stakeholder groups across the state to think about how we might plan for this. And at the conclusion of all the planning process, the state developed its master plan, which was released in January of 2021. So we're in year 2 of its implementation. Looking at issues of housing and age and disability friendly communities. Goal 2, looking at how we reimagine our healthcare system to be more responsive to the needs of the whole person. Looking at goal 3 of including and not isolating older adults and people with disabilities. This really, I think, plays along a lot of the themes that Marie was talking about as well. And 4, looking at our workforce, both our paid and unpaid caregiver workforce, how we can ensure that we have the supply and support for our caregivers that are needed to take care of our aging population. And then 5, how we look at issues of affordability and fighting poverty in our aging population. Next slide. So I'm just going to take a very high level look at each of these goal areas so you can get a sense of the breadth of issues that they address. In goal 1, we have a number of strategies that look at how we can move California towards a more age and disability and dementia friendly community across the state, looking at developing more housing options, thinking about transportation beyond cars, looking at our built environment in our outdoor and community spaces. How can we make it so that it's easier for older adults and people with disabilities to navigate in their community? We also need to consider emergency preparedness. We've seen with a lot of the climate crisis, the impact that our fires and that the power safety shutoffs have had on older adults with people with disabilities. We need to ensure that as a state, we are climate friendly for our aging population and that we are prepared for the emergencies as they evolve. So this goal area is really looking at ensuring that at the community level, we are ready for our aging population. We've included some examples of how local levels have really taken these themes and planned at the local level, and Age Well San Diego is an effort that really has focused in on building out this at the local level as well. Next slide. So when we think about the second goal of the master plan for aging, it's really not about thinking about healthcare and just about how people access services in the medical care service delivery system. It's about looking at the needs of the whole person. So this includes health and long-term services and supports and our social determinants of health, because really we know that healthcare and a person's health is more than just access to medical care. If you don't have housing, if you don't have food, if you don't have services and supports, it's going to be very hard to stay healthy and stay out of the hospital. So there's a number of strategies included within this initiative that look at better integrating our healthcare delivery system across long-term services and supports, social determinants of health, and healthcare delivery systems so that we have a much more unified system as a whole. And also looking at principles of lifelong healthy aging, ensuring that we have the geriatric care workforce to meet the needs of this population, and then also really zeroing in on the needs of our increasingly growing population of individuals living with dementia and how we can ensure that they too have the best care and quality and support in the home, in the community, and in the congregate care setting. And then finally, looking at how we can innovate our nursing homes. I think we saw with COVID-19 that our congregate care settings really were hit hard, and it's time for us to do a wholesale kind of rethinking of congregate care and how we can best meet the needs of this population in those settings. Next slide. So goal 3 is really about this issue of ensuring that older adults and people with disabilities are seen as a vital part and fabric of society. So much of what we heard from Marie shows that, the success a person has as they age is really dependent on how engaged they are in their community. Do they have opportunities to volunteer and to have intergenerational connections, to work if they choose and if they need to? It's really important that we think about things like closing the digital divide, protecting older adults and people with disabilities from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And all of this together, I think, is what we need to help reframe and prepare our system for the needs of our growing aging population. Next slide. And fourth, I think, again, with COVID, we've seen just tremendously what the crisis facing our caregiving workforce, both our paid direct care workers as well as our unpaid family caregivers. So this goal really focuses on building out high quality workforce in the paid caregiving workforce, but also meeting the needs of our unpaid family caregivers who are responsible for approximately 75% of all the care given to individuals over the age of 65 in their home. So our family caregiving workforce cannot be forgotten. At the same time, we need to meet the needs of our direct care workforce that are really often underpaid and not recognized or respected for the valuable work that they're doing in serving older adults and people with disabilities. So there's a number of strategies in the master plan for aging that are, can you go back please? That are focused on building out our supply of direct care workers, of providing training opportunities, and ensuring that we have the high quality caregiving jobs we need now and into the future for this population. Next slide. And then finally, and very importantly, is the issue of affordability. This has to do with really looking at how we as a state can do more to prevent poverty, to prevent homelessness as people age. Unfortunately, in California, we have a tremendous crisis where we have a growing population of people who are experiencing poverty as they age. And this just has many implications. And certainly it's not possible to live well as you age if you are fighting poverty. So this really underlies a lot of our efforts to address equity in the master plan for aging, ensuring that we have economic sufficiency as we age, and protecting from poverty and hunger. I would say related to this, we're also looking as a state as to how we can help ensure that people can afford the cost of long-term services and supports as they age. Because as we all know, Medicare does not pay for long-term services and supports. Many people are not prepared for that and don't understand that, and they end up having to spend all of their assets and resources to pay for their long-term care needs, and then they end up having to go on to Medi-Cal. So we're trying to think of ways that we as a state can address this long-term care financing crisis. And in fact, there is a task force underway right now that's studying this issue, and we'll be making recommendations to the legislature next year. Next slide. So I provided a very high-level overview of the master plan for aging. And I just wanted to say that, I think just the fact that Age Forward Coalition is meeting and convening and thinking about what you all want to do at the local level is success in itself. We do have some tools through the master plan on aging. We have a local playbook that kind of helps individuals and local communities plan at the local level for their own, to develop their own age and disability friendly action plans. So that's a good tool. I encourage you to go onto our website and take advantage of that. Next slide. This again is just more information on how you can download the local playbook afterwards. You can have access to that through our website. Next slide. And then also equally as important is how we measure our progress in implementing the master plan for aging. We have a data dashboard for aging on our website through the master plan that looks across these five bold goals at several indicators that can help us assess the extent to which we're meeting our goals in the master plan. This is still a work in progress, but it's been a tremendous effort, and I think is really the first of its kind across the country to have some accountability and metrics that can be used in gauging our implementation of the master plan. And we really encourage all of you to mine this data. There's a lot of local level data that can be used for your own planning purposes as well. Next slide. So just in summary, in our first year of the master plan, we had tremendous progress in launching significant investments in the state budget, a suite of chaptered aging and disability legislation across the 5 goals. And we have, we're working on implementation for our 132 different initiatives that are outlined in the master plan. And then finally, for accountability, we have 5 different stakeholder committees that have been meeting and helping provide input and feedback on different elements of the master plan. So for more information, we encourage you to go to our website and get information on all of those different committees and how you can play a role. Next slide. We have a first year progress report that's up online as well. If you go to mpa.aging.ca.gov, that shows kind of what happened across all the goals and initiatives in the first year. And at this point, we are now beginning to plan for our next 2 years of the master plan. And while there are 132 initiatives that were outlined for the first 2 years of the master plan, we are going to be building out our next set of initiatives for the next 2 years. Most likely we will not have 132 because I think it's been a little difficult to manage implementation of 132 initiatives across departments. But if you go to the next slide, I just wanted to, along these lines, encourage you all to save the date for September 20th. We're going to be having a conference to help inform the next iteration of the master plan. We want to hear from all of you, and we will have a conference in Sacramento at the Sacramento Convention Center. And it will be free of charge. And it's basically a way to hear from all of our stakeholders as a sort of, convention of sorts that will help us set priorities for the next 2 years of the master plan. So we hope you can be there, and just look for more information soon with registration information that will be coming out. So at this point, I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you. Oh, well, actually just some themes as we move forward with the master plan on aging. We're really going to be focusing on equity throughout to ensure that all Californians and people with disabilities have the ability to age with dignity and independence. We're really trying to be mindful of including both aging and disability in these efforts. That's something that's been really critical to the success of the master plan. This is not just a plan for people over a certain age. It's a plan that meets the needs of people as they age. So people with disabilities who are adults and use the same types of services and supports as people who are over the age of 60 are also included in this. We want to listen, we want to partner with all of you and lead in addressing the issues that we need to now in the future. And this will require engagement, working across silos, and a nimble approach so that we can respond to the issues of the day as they emerge in the planning process. So that's it for me. I look forward to a discussion and any questions you all have. And there's our website to get more information about the master plan.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. So interesting, and how heartwarming it is to see how important the California Department of Aging is focusing on this issue with real, thoughtful programs, data collection, and that kind of thing. So it's wonderful. I'm going to spend just a few minutes tying these two things together. I've made some notes as the speakers have been talking. And while I do this, I do encourage you to pop your questions into the Q&A section so that we can turn them over to our panel members in a few moments. So first of all, as Sarah was saying, the goal 1 of the Master Plan on Aging is housing for all stages and ages. And how that ties in with the new map of life, we heard Marie talking about how important it is to build longevity-ready communities, so places that are safe and flexible housing for an age-diverse population. So not only thinking about older adults, but a place and an environment where all people feel welcome, and that's very inclusive. And then in terms of the age being a net positive, age diversity, multi-generational families can share the financial and social resources that it may include housing and caregiving. And then when we think about goal 2, health reimagined, Marie was telling us about how important it is to align health spans to lifespans. And that includes investments in every stage of life, not only in older adults. She also mentioned accessing healthcare through telemedicine, which I think has taken a big boost during the time of COVID. And then something that didn't come up specifically, but I know is in the new Map of Life report, is thinking about how we face dying. I think that there is a cultural shift around dying that can give people more control over the end of life care that they would prefer. And then health reimagined also can be tied back to the new map of life through the area of the prepare to be amazed by the future of aging. And the one statistic that I've been talking about a lot is how I think it's something like 50% of today's 5-year-olds will live to be over 100 or live to be 100. And I think that's an amazing statistic. And today's 5-year-olds will also benefit from an astonishing array of medical advances and emerging technologies that will make their experience of aging far different from today's older adults. And then, you know, she mentioned things like age-related technology being built into our clothing, our cars, our homes. How exciting is that going to be? Marie also mentioned geroscience, which has the potential to transform health and how we age. Let's see. And then this idea of working more years with greater flexibility. I think that that can assist us with health reimagined by, for example, allowing Medicare to cover the full employee health cost of workers over the age of 65, which would remove a key barrier for employers concerned that retaining or hiring an older worker would increase their healthcare costs. And then also thinking about learning throughout life. Learning throughout life not only provides economic opportunities, but also measurable health benefits, especially for older adults. And maintaining stimulating activities improves cognitive and physical health. So that link between education and health again. And then moving to goal 3, inclusion and equity, not isolation. That ties back to the new map of life because again, with this idea that age diversity is a net positive, fostering meaningful connections among different generations means that we can fully take advantage of the social capital that exists. Working more years with more flexibility allows, so older people who work spend more money and pay more taxes. Whether they remain engaged through paid or volunteer work, they are also healthier and have greater mental agility than those who do not work. And then in terms of inclusion and equity, not isolation, obviously learning throughout the life provides new options for learning outside the confines of formal education, with people of all ages able to acquire the knowledge they need at every stage of their lives and to access it in a way that fits their needs, interests, abilities, schedules, and budgets. And then thinking about life transitions being a feature and not a bug. What a cool idea that is. So rather than associating the second half of life principally with things like retirement, death, menopause, we can create social observances around meaningful milestones such as volunteering and mentoring, returning to work, launching an encore career or a new business, downsizing a home, or getting back into the game after illness or injury with physical limitations. Moving to goal 4, caregiving that works. When we think about it through the lens of age diversity as a net positive, we've already mentioned that multi-generational families can share financial and social resources, including caregiving. And then in terms of goal number 5, affording aging, workers 55 and older are the fastest growing cohort, now comprising 25% of the US workforce. And then thinking about working more years with more flexibility, we can start by replacing the traditional one-way street from education to work to retirement with more flexible routes in and out of the workplace, including paid and unpaid intervals for caregiving, health needs, lifelong learning, and social transitions that we can expect over a century-long life. This idea of glide paths and returnships. Unplanned or unwanted retirements deprive individuals of income, employers of productivity, and governments of income and payroll taxes. So we want to make sure that people can stay working as long as they are able to do so. So one idea that's mentioned in the new map of life is changes to Social Security policy, which would allow retirees who want to resume paid work to do so without being penalized by reductions in benefits. And then lifelong learning provides all sorts of economic opportunities. And then the one other thing, which is not necessarily a goal, but which both Sarah and Marie spoke about, was this importance of age-friendly environments. And that aligns health spans to lifespans by addressing the systems that produce disparities, investing not only in better access to healthcare, but in the health of communities, especially those affected by poverty, discrimination, and environmental damage. And then as we think about building longevity-ready communities, there's an opportunity to re-engineer our infrastructure in preparation for longer human lives with built environments that are more walkable and provide access to mass transit, healthcare, and opportunities for lifelong learning, and that foster intergenerational connections. So you can see there's a wonderful overlap here between the new map of life and the master plan on aging. And I feel it's a very exciting time for us as a society to be thinking about how we can reap the benefits of an increasingly older, more diverse, and hopefully healthier population. So now I'm going to, I think, turn over to Susan Houston, who is going to help us with the questions that have been coming in. And please do continue to submit your questions.
Thank you, Sandy. Great tying it all together. So I have a couple of questions. The first one is from Jane, and I'm going to direct it to Marie. You talk a lot about scientific advances to enhance aging. However, how do we make better use of existing therapies that help the aging population stay healthy and independent? Our medical providers are moving towards only providing acute care and away from providing services that help people maintain their health and fitness. There's such a disconnect here.
That's a great point. And I think it's along the lines of a lot of what we've been thinking about. And so the first thing it makes me think of is actually something that one of our faculty advisors from the first wave of cohorts would say. Dr. Nirav Shah, he's at the Clinical Excellent Research Center at Stanford, and he was the faculty advisor for our healthcare fellow. And I don't have his exact quote, so I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but he was essentially making the point that our healthcare system is, the way that our healthcare system is currently designed, it's designed to deliver more healthcare, not designed to deliver more health. And so I don't have, I certainly don't have an answer that's going to say, we need to do exactly this thing and that will solve it. But I think that is something that we're thinking about, and that is something that a lot of people are thinking about right now is how can we shift more toward prevention? How can we shift more toward emphasizing sort of, lifestyle solutions rather than constantly reacting to health things that are coming up. And the way that we're working on that with the New Map of Life project going forward is we have a next wave of research fellows coming in. They're going to start in the fall. So we're working on finalizing all of them. But for example, we will have one in the lifestyle space who will continue to study, how lifestyle can make an impact here. We also have a research fellow who will be, so I should actually back up for a second, because the new wave of research fellows, we're going to be calling them impact fellows. The first wave, we're focused primarily on researching the current state of the domain and figuring out how we're doing in each of those 9 domains, and sort of like, what are the pain points, what are the areas where we need to be making changes. And then our next wave of fellows we're calling impact fellows, and so they're still going to have a faculty advisor, so they're still going to have a research background, but they're also going to be partnered with organizations, whether they're private companies or nonprofits or potentially even government organizations. And they're going to be trying to implement changes. And so one of those areas that we already have set is going to be someone who's going to be working with the Stanford School of Medicine to write a new curriculum for medical students that better integrates aging. So I think there are sort of a lot of areas where we can be making these changes, both within the healthcare system and potentially even with, employers in terms of how we make these changes. But all that to say, that is a great point. I think that is something that needs to shift. And I think there are sort of like multiple points in our society where we can start making that shift.
Thanks, Marie. Okay, the next question is from Jackie, and I'm going to ask Sarah to answer this one at first. Can employers and online employment services include more options for flexible work opportunities, more than part-time or distance from home? Also, can employers ask their HR departments to require continuing education courses on topics such as longevity issues and opportunities? This should be required, especially for those nearing retirement, but also for employees who have or care for older parents.
Jackie, thank you. That is such an important point. I think this issue of flexibility that we talked about that older adults need as they want to rejoin the workforce or stay in the workforce. It's also important for all families, I think. I think we certainly saw with COVID that one benefit of it has been kind of a rethinking of how we think about work, and that you don't necessarily need to be in the office 40 hours a week to be effective at the job you're doing. And I think this has particularly been a big issue for women caregivers, women raising children, as well as women who are trying to caregive for their parents. I know I've been through this a lot, and the ability to work virtually has been really, really life-saving in terms of being able to take care of my own family and community. But in terms of requiring, I think there's a lot of different practices underway now. I'm not familiar with what the requirements are, say, of HR to be requiring continuing education. There's certainly, I'm sure, a lot that can be done in this space of opening up the opportunities in our private sector for retaining a workforce and for ensuring that older adults can stay in longer. I think it's a really important conversation to have with local chambers of commerce to think about how to engage our business community on these issues. I would also say that, just as an example, at the state level, there's been a complete change in how we view kind of flexibility in work and meeting the needs of our workforce. As an example, the Department of Aging now is, we're pretty much fully virtual, but with the opportunity for teams to come back and meet in person on the calendar basis that works for each particular team. So a few years ago, you never would have seen this at the state level. And I think we've come a long way, but I think that we also need to do a lot in terms of getting the private sector to follow suit in all spaces. So I don't know if Marie wants to add anything to that.
I think that's great. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, I have one additional question. So, and this is for Sarah and Marie, if she has any input. The Master Plan on Aging has such wonderful goals. It's such a robust plan. Do you anticipate there will be funding available to support the goals and the initiatives within the Master Plan on Aging?
Yeah, so that's a really important question. There were a number of investments, really historical investments made last year. We had a lot of new federal funds coming in, and so we had some significant investments in different initiatives, home and community-based service initiatives, as well as workforce initiatives and others. That's not to say we still don't have a long way to go. So, one of the challenges is, and one of the opportunities is that these issues aren't just impacting one department or one program. It's across our state, right? It's across sectors. So I think that as we've seen advancements and investments in building out our aging service delivery system, and I could send a follow-up, kind of details of what has been funded in the budget, we still have a long way to go. So it's our responsibility at the Department of Aging to be working with our state partners to be identifying those spaces where we need more investment. Certainly it depends on the state's fiscal situation, but it also depends on a lot of the advocacy that you all bring in terms of vocalizing where the needs are and working at your local level to talk to your legislators about where the needs are for investments. I can't communicate strongly enough how important it is to hear from all of you and how your legislators want to know what is needed and where the solutions are. We're working on it from our side at the state, but it's also important that all of our stakeholders do the same. So yes, there have been investments, but absolutely, we're just getting started and lots more will be needed. I would say additionally to think about what that looks like in terms of a public-private approach, because the state won't be able to pay for everything associated with planning, but certainly we have a responsibility to provide the framework for it. So I think we need to also do a good job of engaging our private sector on these issues as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, this one is for Marie from Leslie. As a board certified health and wellness coach, I'm wondering how can lifestyle health and wellness coaches be included in the mix of supporting active agers' goals of improving lifestyle wellness, thereby enhancing quality of life from surviving to thriving. The National Board of HWC is a great resource for such initiatives.
That's a great question. And I think that there is certainly space for lifestyle coaches. That's certainly a very helpful resource for individuals, especially as they're trying to figure out, sort of their personal ways of wanting to, stay fit and meet their goals as they're aging. Let me see if I am getting at what you're asking. I think that, a great opportunity, it makes me think of some resources that, I work at Stanford, that Stanford offers its employees as, sort of an employee benefit for, it's essentially as part of working at Stanford, then you have these opportunities to engage with professionals such as this. We have this in, sort of the financial literacy area, and we have it for physical health as well. And so I think this would be potentially a great opportunity and something that we would consider as sort of an impact fellow area for the new map of life, is figuring out how employers, and I'm trying to think of other organizations that might be able to reach a wider group of people, because I think potentially one of the challenges here is both affordability. Is this something, is a coach that's something people can afford on their own? And also accessibility. Is this a resource that people are really finding out about a lot? So, partnering with employers and or other organizations that have a lot of reach and that might also have funding would be a great opportunity to sort of, get this resource to more people.
Thanks, Marie. Any other questions? I do not see any more. So I will hand it back to Sandy to conclude the discussion.
Well, thank you. I actually had a question. It seems to me that a lot of these issues are really big: affordable housing, transportation, making our environments healthy, access to healthcare, that kind of thing. So I would like to ask each of the panelists what they think can be done to make sure that there's more collaboration between the public and the private sector, because it seems to me that it can't be the responsibility of only one group. We've all got to work more together to solve these very large problems. So do you have any thoughts or advice about how we can work more closely together?
I really appreciate that, Sandy, because I couldn't agree more. I mean, preparing our state and our society for the aging of our population and really changing the paradigm, as we've been talking about, it does not fall on the burden or follow the responsibility of one sector alone. It has to be something across public and private and philanthropy at the local level, at the state level. So to that end, I would say a couple of things. One is at the state level, I think we have a responsibility to utilize leadership in engaging cross-sector. So in talking to our private, to the businesses, to all of the different providers across the system, to figure out where we all can play a role moving forward. But then also, I would say at the local level, it really just helps, I think, to start these conversations with your local chamber of commerce, with your local provider agencies outside of the aging service delivery system. How can you start these conversations to start thinking about cross-sector planning as the society tries to develop more age and disability inclusive communities?
Very good. Marie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say, I just kind of building on what Sarah said, I think that that on, working for an academic institution, I see us as also having a role in sort of reaching outside of ourselves. I think that might be sort of a theme here, is that especially within academia, the proverbial ivory tower, it's often so siloed. And so if we can continue to, this is sort of part of our efforts, if we can continue to sort of reach outside of ourselves and form those partnerships, I think that's sort of, on each of us to do that. And that's certainly what we're trying to do. And then I would also certainly reiterate Sarah's point about starting at the local level. And I think, that's in part what we're trying to do with our impact fellows, is just, kind of start one organization at a time and just, keep trying to make these changes where we can actually make an impact and grow it from there.
Thank you. So I actually see that there has been another question that popped up since. So seeing as we are still a little ahead of time, we'll take the opportunity to read it. And this question comes from Christina, basically saying that the presentations have highlighted the need to have programs that work across age groups. But how can we make this happen when it seems like funding for older adult programs is often pitted against funding for children and young people?
There's so much opportunity here for, I think, intergenerational programming. And we do often, or maybe not, maybe I shouldn't make generalizations about that, but I think there's a tendency to think about these different populations as either or. And I think that a lot of that is sort of a product of how age segregated our society has been over the last 100 years, that we do sort of view individual age groups as being very distinct from one another. And certainly, at different ages, we have different qualities and characteristics. But in the end, there's so much opportunity for intergenerational connections. And I think that there is so much opportunity to treat these groups together. Maybe treat isn't quite the right word, but I'm, especially if we're thinking of older adult, versus child funding, some of the best programs for both groups in recent years have been ones that combine the two. The sort of obvious example is combining, an older adult living community with a preschool. And, that's had some of the best outcomes for both of those populations. And I don't know that this can be done for every single issue, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to not look at, for us to not look at this as either or funding, but to figure out how to, to help these groups together.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think just to kind of expand it too, it ties into the importance of why it's so important for us to reframe when we talk about a master plan for aging. It's not a master plan for, as I said, people over a certain age. It's a master plan for all of us, because aging is a community issue. It's all of us. It's about families, it's about caregivers, and it's about older adults. So I think if we can start to change that paradigm and see that we're actually all on the same team and we don't need to be, competing versus the children's programming and stealing funding from one versus the other, I think that will bring us a lot further forward. I would say for us at the state level, there's always been support by our legislators and our administration to support older adults, but we still have a long ways to go in having these issues prioritized across all of our policymaker agendas. So they're not always the popular issues that get all the attention. And I don't think it has to be a competition across ages. I just think that we need to change how we think about age, because there is some ageism in terms of how policy is developed as well. So the ageism kind of plays throughout, and I think it's on all of us to change that. But I love the example of the intergenerational programming. And I think about this amazing program in Contra Costa County called Choice in Aging and Choice in Learning. And they have the Choice in Aging is the Adult Day Healthcare Center that is at the same location as Choice in Learning, which is the preschool. And so they have joint programming, and it's all the same organization that's part of the bigger service, delivered in the community. So more things like that, and just more of the recognition with braided funding across generations, I think will help us get further down that path.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's a great positive note to end this presentation. And I just want to thank you both so much again. It was so interesting and it's so inspiring. And I also would like to thank Maria and Nancy, who's behind the scenes from the CCL TSS in helping us to manage the technology part of this webinar. And then to thank the Age Forward Coalition as a whole, and particularly the leadership team for helping us to put this together. Remember, May is Older American Month Act. So if you have an older American in your life, go out and give them a high five or a hug if you feel comfortable doing that. Thank you very much. The slides will be made available towards, they will be, a link will be sent to them, to everybody who was registered for the presentation today. So thank you very much for attending and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.